So what path or religion are you in your pursuit of perfection with God? What are you?
I was raised Seventh-day Adventist.
Okay, and what does that mean?
Seventh-day Adventist is a Christian denomination, and one of the things that we believe is observing the Sabbath. So from a young child, being brought up, I was always brought up with Sabbath observance. So Friday night sundown, Saturday night sundown, as mentioned in the Ten Commandments, remember the seventh day to keep it holy. And then also Jesus observed Sabbath as well.
Yeah.
So it's one day where I don't check my emails, I don't respond to work calls, I don't read
From
script.
Friday night
sundown to Saturday night sundown.
Yeah.
No work.
You don't check your emails.
No.
That's
there's a function.
that's like against the commandment of Hollywood that thou shalt carry thy BlackBerry at all times.
But you know what? Here's a good thing. When you set boundaries.
That's Devon Franklin, an American movie producer who has worked in Hollywood for decades. He's worked on many films and TV shows in his career, including Will Smith's The Pursuit of Happiness, 7 Pounds, as well as The Ugly Truth, The Pink Panther 2, and The Karate Kid. A Hollywood Reporter named him one of the youngest and most influential executives under 35, and Variety magazine named him one of the top 10 producers to watch. In the clip you just listened to, Devon is featured on the Oprah Winfrey Show, but not to talk about the movies he's worked on or the hundreds of millions of dollars he's made for his production companies. Instead, he's there to talk about his faith and his relationship with the Sabbath. Take a listen.
For me, Sabbath is a time to recharge. It's a time to rest. It's a time to spend time with my family. It's a time to spiritually reconnect.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Working as an intern with
Yes.
Will Smith, you say to them, look, I have to have the Sabbath off.
Friday night sundown, Saturday night sundown off. And what happened was,
Weren't you scared to say that?
Yeah, I was scared. It wasn't intentional.
Devon's first big break was an internship with the one and only Will Smith. But as Oprah just alluded to, broaching the topic of Sabbath, the fact that Devon would not work from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday was a potential deal breaker. In the filmmaking industry, time is money. So why would a big shot like Will Smith hire someone who could potentially cost him for no other reason than religious conviction?
It wasn't intentional.
It wasn't intentional, but I'm there in the interview.
Yes.
And God starts to, literally, it feels like he's speaking to me, because everything goes great. I feel like, okay, yeah, I got this in the bag. You know how you just go in and you land, hey, it's all good. But at the end of the interview, it was like God was saying, tell her about the Sabbath. And I'm like, no, I'll tell her after I get the internship.
After I get the
after
job,
I get what I want.
I'll tell them.
Right.
Yeah.
But he said, no, be obedient. And so I said, man, all right, well, here's the thing. I can't take this internship if I have to work Friday night sundown or Saturday night sundown because I observe the Sabbath. And she was quiet. And then after a moment, she said, don't worry, we'll work around that. And I said, hallelujah. And what it did was it gave me confidence that if I embrace who I am, it will open doors, not shut them.
For people like Devon Franklin, the Sabbath, while it might be a nice idea, gets in the way of career ambitions, especially in a world that doesn't see the value in literally stopping once per week. But it's not just Seventh-day Adventists who are dedicated to this seemingly crazy discipline. Jews have practiced the Sabbath for thousands of years, and many other Christians around the world are also coming to see its importance. Take the recent documentary simply titled The Sabbath. It includes voices from the Jewish community and Seventh-day Adventist community, but also Catholics, Baptists, and evangelicals.
6 days you may labor and do all your work.
But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God.
Keep it separate. Keep it set apart from the ordinary rhythm of time.
There's a good reason why, historians are saying that post-World War II, we entered the period called the Great Acceleration. It's that people now feel the pacing of their lives has accelerated to a point where they don't have time to care for themselves. They don't have time to care for family members.
I think our culture right now is profoundly burned out.
2/3 of Americans say that they're working more than 40 hours any given week. We have to work more in order to sustain the same level of living.
The labor movement in America is a surprisingly religious story.
Today, the Sabbath is experiencing quite a lot of attention as many Christians begin to understand that it isn't just about refraining from work. It's a spiritual discipline designed to renew the mind, body, and soul. A day to rest, delight, connect, and worship. In this episode of Signs Radio, I speak to Maryellen and Georgia, two individuals with different faith backgrounds. We explore how they came to practice the Sabbath and what it means for them today. Anyway, this is Signs Radio, episode 209. You're tired. You need a Sabbath. I am very excited about today's conversation, as not only are we talking about the Sabbath, which is something that I really love and that is such a game changer in my own life, but I'm talking about it with two incredible women who I have explored and discussed and even enjoyed the Sabbath with. And I just love what they both have to say and bring on this topic. So thank you so much, Maryellen and Georgia, for joining me today.
Thanks. And yeah, it's so sweet to be here. Like, I don't know, new friends, old friends, it'll be fun.
It is very cool. I agree. I want to start with you, Maryellen. You are not a stranger to signs. You've written for us, you've recorded with us, and this conversation was inspired by an article you wrote for us in our August issue on this very topic of rest and Sabbath. But for anyone who is stumbling upon this podcast for the first time, can you paint a picture about what your life looks like?
Yeah, sure. So I am a freelancer. I work from home and I do everything from like graphic design and illustration to writing. So I'm a creative soul and it keeps me busy. And it's funny that we're recording a podcast on Sabbath because I feel like God's kind of, calling me up on the fact that I've been so crazy busy recently and I really need to inject some rest into my life. But I'm married to my husband, Josh, and we live in a little granny flat and have 2 pet ducks. And that's about it. It's a fun, simple existence.
Fun and simple is just what we want. You have also written a poetry book recently, which is on the topic of rest and has an awesome title. Do you want to share a bit about that with us?
I do. Sitting here on my shelf, it's called Slow Lilies. I wrote and illustrated it, and it was just like one of those pipe dreams that you never think you're actually going to do, but I was like, I have to do it. And so I self-published it, and I'm really proud of it.
I can definitely vouch for it if anyone is interested in poetry. Georgia, surfer girl, rockstar, creative, you are a human of many skills. This is your first time with us, so we would love to hear just a bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you do.
Cool. I am a single Pringle still, so I just live with my housemate. I work at the moment for Christian Youth Camp, so doing outdoor recreation, helping run school camps and things like that. But outside of that, I really enjoy songwriting and making music. Yeah, and just enjoy spending time with friends, hanging out, building community and things like that.
Awesome. I love it. Well, today we are talking about the Sabbath, also known as Shabbat and even Shabbos in some cultures. And this is basically an ancient practice that's rooted in the biblical story of creation. The word Shabbat in Hebrew literally means to stop or to cease. And we see it come up in Genesis after God creates the world. And then we also see it come up in the 10 Commandments where humanity is like instructed to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Now, that might be interesting to some. I'm sure many will have heard that before. But for me, put simply, the Sabbath is a time I take each week to rest from the things that keep me busy and keep me worried. It's a time that I try to rest both physically and mentally and instead focus on what's really important in life. For me, that's my faith, that's my family, that's my friends. But I would love to hear from both of you in your own words. Like, what does the Sabbath mean to you personally? How would you describe it to someone who would never heard of it before?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, the meaning of Sabbath has definitely changed. As I think you mentioned in the start, like you and me have, Zanita and Maryellen, have been keeping the Sabbath or like practicing the Sabbath most of our lives. We were brought up that way. And so like when I was a kid, I didn't really understand it. It was just this day that we kept like Friday night to Saturday night, 24 hours. where we couldn't do anything. It was like, oh man, I just want to go out and watch TV, or I want to like do all the normal things I would do. But it was just like this period of rest. And for a kid, that's quite challenging. But definitely as I've grown older and into adulthood, now I savor those 24 hours, because for me, it is sometimes the only 24 hours in my week where I spend time with like friends. Sometimes it's the only 24 hours where I'm not thinking about work. So it's just like, yeah, a period of total rest and restoration where I won't go shopping, I won't do errands, I won't do regular life stuff that I do throughout the week. I try and make it really special and restful. So yeah, that's a bit of an explanation. I'd love to know how, Georgia, how yours differs from mine though.
Yeah, cool. Well, actually, Sabbath just hasn't really been on my radar. I haven't grown up practicing the Sabbath. I kind of thought it was just like an Old Testament kind of thing. Yeah, I didn't even really think it was relevant. But then I actually had a friend send me a podcast on the Sabbath, and I listened to it, and I really loved hearing God's heart behind it and the intentionality of like a day of rest. And then I kind of began to listen a little bit more about like biblically and just understanding a bit more about what the Sabbath is all about. And it just got me excited. So I started practicing the Sabbath maybe a year and a half ago. So start of last year. But I think what stood out to me is, I'm not sure if John Mark Comer said this or where it's come from, but it's like refraining from working, wanting and worrying. And that's really stood out to me. For a day of rest, just like intentionally making the choice to, just to be. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was John Mark Comer, because I re-listened to a bunch of his Sabbath podcast episodes recently. I find when I get really busy in life, it's when I start craving like Sabbath content. Like, how do I rest? How do I live? It's like this negative cycle. But anyway, and yeah, he definitely says working, worrying, and wanting. I love that. It's so good. Out of curiosity, Georgia, was your first podcast that you listened to, was that a John Mark Comer podcast? Do you remember?
I think it was someone sharing an upper room.
Cool.
Yeah, there was a few people sharing an upper room about, just what it's been looking like for them to practice the Sabbath. And then I moved in, I saw the John Mark Comer podcast, and I like smashed through those Sabbath podcasts. I was like eating it up. And then I was like, who do I know that does this? And then I kind of, realized a few friends have been keen to lean into it. And people like Zanita have actually been practicing it their whole life. So, it's been really, really cool.
Yeah, there's an awesome series for anyone who's interested in learning more about it called Practicing the Way, and it goes into like a deep dive of the Sabbath. And I know heaps of people who have found it really helpful when they've just been kind of starting out with the Sabbath and don't really know that much about it. The Sabbath Gift is another awesome resource that you can go to online. It's just sabbathgift.info. But there's heaps of videos on there and heaps of resources that are really helpful as well. Before we actually record on this episode, I was telling Georgia that Maryellen and I had actually grown up going to the same church. So our parents each Saturday would drag all us kids along to church. And I'm guessing that our Sabbaths probably look pretty similar. Like, we've both grown up in Adventist churches in Sydney. For me, growing up, Sabbath started on a Friday night and would often begin with a family meal, or we would have friends over for dinner. And then come Saturday, we would go to church in the morning. We would often eat with people at church, like have a picnic, or everyone would bring a dish and we would just sit on the lawn or something. And then a lot of the times we would go on a bushwalk or go to the beach or just do something in nature. So Sabbath would just kind of linger on for the whole Saturday. Sometimes my Sabbaths still look pretty similar to that, but in the last few years I've started going through this idea of the Sabbath with people who it is completely new to, and Georgia has been a part of that journey. And I found it really refreshing to hear about, I guess, the creative ways in which people are taking that time to spend their Sabbaths and to spend with God. So I guess I'd love to hear from you, Georgia. What has Sabbath come to look like for yourself, and What are some things that you do to rest on Sabbath?
Yeah. I feel like I'm just scratching the surface. I'd probably like to lock in a few things that I really do want to keep practicing on a Saturday. But, well, as you know, Zanita, like once a month on a Friday night, we'll have a big potluck dinner. So we'll have a bunch of friends over at my place and just kick off the Sabbath with a dinner. Might share a bit of scripture, and then we'll go around and we'll at least share our golden moments, which is just sharing one of our most favourite moments of the week, whether it's something crazy awesome or just simple and beautiful. So I love starting the Sabbath that way. But that's probably once a month. So usually on a Friday night, I'll have dinner with some friends and just kick off the Sabbath that way. And then on a Saturday, I do enjoy going for a really nice walk along the beach, just in the sunshine, whether it's in silence or, just listening to some music or whatever. Another thing I like to do is maybe go to a cute cafe and have a coffee and just sit and read or sit and journal. On the weekend, I played tennis with some friends in the afternoon, and that was just so much fun.
I love that.
Yeah. It changes.
Maryellen, I would be interested to know at what point that shift happened for you. Obviously, we grew up with this, and as kids, you kind of just do it because your parents do it, and it doesn't really hold that much significance. You just go because you go with them. And I guess I'm curious, at what point of your life did you decide that you wanted to continue practicing the Sabbath, or did it become more special to you, or did you have a light bulb moment that this was something that you really wanted to lean into more?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd say going back now, probably late high school, I think. And I think that's probably a fairly natural trajectory as well, because as you age up, high school, you get more work, and then you're going through HSC or your final year of school, whatever that looks like. The workload just kind of exponentially increases. And then from that point, I feel like it doesn't, for extended periods of time, doesn't ever really go backwards. I don't think I've ever been for a long period of time less busy than I was in year 12 kind of thing. Life just, for whatever reason, gets crazier and crazier, and as much as we try and undo that, it's just, anyway. So I think probably when I was about 17, 18, it really switched in my brain. And that's also when I kind of took on faith for myself as well, I suppose. I started going to a new church that I chose. It was different to my parents. I kind of, I was baptized around then. And I think I began to see God's character for what it was rather than what I'd kind of been fed as a kid. So the Sabbath was very much ingrained in my, spiritual development, which was cool. But even in the last, I'm 28 now, so the last 10 years, it's also shifted a lot. And I think some of sort of the rigid structures that I was brought up with have also begun to change. And I love what you were sharing, Georgia, about just going for a walk on the beach and playing tennis, because that never would have been a reality for me growing up. But now I can kind of relate to some of that stuff as well. So that's a bit of my journey.
That's the cool thing about the Sabbath. It's that while in times past, and to be honest, even you'll find this still in some people today, what you have and haven't been able to do on the Sabbath has looked quite rigid, and it's taken some of the joy that God intended for it to have. But rest just looks so different to different people. What's restful for you might be really stressful for someone else, and vice versa. And I think that's just something that's really important to keep in mind. But going back to this idea of rest, one might think that in our already super busy lives, taking a day off to rest will only make us more stressed and worried, because it's just going to mean that we don't get our stuff done. Surely if I'm busy, taking a day off isn't helpful to the pace of my life. Have you guys found that to be the case? How does taking time off to rest impact you, for the rest of your week?
I have a quick thought on that. There is a book. It is a great introduction to the topic of Sabbath. It's one of my favorites. It's called The Art of Rest by Adam Mabry, I'm not sure. Anyway, and he has this cool metaphor in there about how often when people are raised actually kind of in a Sabbath tradition, it can feel quite works-based and quite rigid and structured and traditional and all that kind of stuff. And how it can kind of feel like you're on one treadmill for 6 days of the week and you're running and you're running and you're doing your life. And then the Sabbath is like another treadmill you have to jump on, where you've got like church commitments and you've got, you know, family things and you've got service things you're doing, or whatever it is with your Sabbath community, I guess, and how that is not the approach that God ever like designed Sabbath to be. So I think on that, like what I've learned is that in order to keep Sabbath properly, you have to live all 6 days or all 7 days differently. You can't just jump off one treadmill onto the other. You have to kind of like on a Tuesday, like you're looking forward to Sabbath, and on Sunday, you're looking back on Sabbath or whatever, kind of to prepare. Like you just have to live your life in a different rhythm, I guess, which does change things.
I feel like for me, I just get so excited for the Sabbath. Like I love it. For me, it's been a relief for sure getting to Sabbath. But I think it's also actually, I've noticed I'm more intentional on the other 6 days. I've actually noticed I procrastinate less, which is interesting.
I have a question for Georgia, because I'm curious what community looks like for you currently, in the sense that I imagine it's really difficult if you're like the only person you know that keeps Sabbath to keep Sabbath, because it's like, what do? You're like alone the whole time. You can't do what, I don't know. Because I'm in a really fortunate position where I have quite a large community of people I can do Sabbath with, you know, just because of, the way I was raised and people I know and whatever. But yeah, someone who stepped out of not Sabbathing into Sabbathing, like, have you found a community, or what did that look like at first? Just so curious.
Yeah, I guess the Sabbath looks different for everyone as well. And it's probably a bit different for me because I've grown up going to church on Sundays. So it's different again in a way. But it's been cool because for the past 2 years I've been living with this friend who also has started practicing the Sabbath and has been part of, this group that sort of we've been meeting up with Zanita. And so her and her partner have been practicing it. So we'd kind of do it together. And I do have a few close friends that have been either practicing it for a long time or leaning into it. So I haven't found it too difficult in that sense. I have a small group of friends that are leaning into it. So
yeah, nice. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do your family practice Sabbath? Did they react well to it, or what did that look like?
Yeah. No, I think like my family enjoy the weekend, but it's not that I wouldn't say they're like, yep, it's the Sabbath, like it's a set apart day, that kind of a thing. But yeah, I think they just like, they love the thought behind it. They didn't have any strong opinions on it. They were just like, oh, cool, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
I've heard stories of people who, you know, they start practicing Sabbath, and maybe in the past they used to do something that they no longer do. For example, they used to go to like soccer games for their nephew or whatever it is, and now they're not doing that anymore because it's like Sabbath. And so it kind of creates this strange conflict sometimes, or misunderstanding, where people are like, but why aren't you doing that? And then it's just a really uncomfortable situation to have to explain that to people. And I know for me, like a lot of my extended family aren't Adventist or don't keep Sabbath. My denomination is Adventist, but and so they're often like, hang on, but why can't you come to the cafe with us? I'm confused. And it's just hard to explain sometimes. So I'm glad your family are like on board with it. That's good.
Yeah, I feel like maybe in the years to come it might be a bit more of a challenge. Even to say, in terms of like, I'll have kids eventually and, you know, sports on the weekends and things like that. I guess it's, how do you want to spend the Sabbath? It can be challenging, I think, when events pop up on Saturdays, like even like weddings and close friends' birthdays, which I go to. But I do find that challenging. It's like, okay, that day's been jam-packed. Yeah. I'm still figuring it out, really. Yeah.
I think it's one of those things it's good to reflect on how your Sabbathing is going every now and then, just to see if it's like restoring you, to see if you're doing it with the right mindset and not just checking it off. But you're right, Maryellen. My first job was at Hungry Jack's when I was 14 years old. I was the only girl that was a burger boy out the back. I'm not actually sure why, but that was the case. But I do remember having to tell my boss that I wasn't available to work on Saturdays. And he was like, what? No Saturdays ever. Look, that's our busiest day. And I'm like, well, it's my Sabbath. And he kind of laughed at that and said, oh, well, maybe I should start practicing the Sabbath. So it can get really awkward, but I hope that people push past that awkwardness and push past that awkwardness of telling people, oh, I'm not going to come to this because this is what I believe. Because, yeah, it is an awesome thing. And if more people did it, the world would probably be a lot better. Even if it wasn't for spiritual reasons, even if it was just simply a day to stop and pause and do things that bring you joy and restore your soul. There's so many benefits to it that, yeah, even if you don't believe in God and aren't doing it for those spiritual reasons, it will benefit you.
Yeah.
I know another woman who has recently started practicing the Sabbath. She's about 60 or 70 years old.
Wow.
So it's never too late to start. But she initially found it quite difficult. She does not belong to a church, but has read about it, heard about it, and likes the idea of it. But for anyone who is new to this idea of the Sabbath, do either of you have any words of wisdom for how they can start out? Or even do you know of any good resources that could help them get on their way with it?
I think, well, maybe it's not, I guess it is practical advice. Maybe it's like a step before the practical advice, what I'm about to say. I think even for me now, as a regular Sabbath practicer, I really sometimes struggle with it. And we've kind of touched on this already, but like it just feels unnatural and you don't want to do it and you'd rather work on other things. And it's really easy to lose your conviction unless you actively maintain it, right? So I regularly reconsume podcasts, articles, books, YouTube videos, whatever, about the importance of Sabbath because, you know, the Bible has quite a lot to say, but when you hear other people put it into practical terms and really explain the heart behind it. But yeah, like just finding as many books as you can and just like reading about it consistently, I think it really helped me anyway, just maintain that perspective and why it's important.
Yeah, so good, Maryellen. I would definitely second that advice. I know that you're quite a reader. Do you have any favorite books that you have read on the topic of the Sabbath?
Yeah, Art of Rest is definitely one. I think that's a great place to jump in because it's very easy to read. But probably my favorite book on it, and it's a lot more dense, but it's called Subversive Sabbath by A.J. Swoboda. And it's basically, I don't know, the Bible on Sabbath, if I can say that. Like it's just so much info in there, and it really delves into like the theological depth and complexity and beauty. I want to say Sabbath is one of the most dense, it just relates to everything about spirituality and God's character and the creation and everything. And he just goes into it so, so well. So that for me is like, if you haven't read it, definitely read it. It's so good. There's also a podcast series called Fight, Hustle, and Hurry, I think it is. And it has John Mark Comer and another guy, I forget his name off the top of my head. It's really, really good as well. It's kind of a conversation and it's a 8-part series, all dedicated to Sabbath. So that was really, really good. Yeah.
Yeah, I've listened to that about 5 times. It's John Mark Comer and Jefferson Bethke, I think his name is. George, I would love to hear from you also. Do you have any advice or tips? How did you begin practicing this? Did you just go from the beginning a full day, or did you kind of work your way up to it? What was your experience like? And yeah, do you have any tips for anyone else starting out?
I think I did sort of try and go straight into like Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. But I know for, some of our other friends, they've just tried to put aside like a 4-hour pocket on a Saturday morning or something. Again, John Mark Comer, he's got so many good tips. But just starting small and starting with something that's achievable and not kind of just, I think a lot of us can just be like all in or all out. But just chucking perfectionism out the window and just starting. I think too, it did help me to have a couple of things that I know I would prep on a Thursday or on maybe like a Friday arvo. so that I can come into Sabbath with those things like done, like for example, vacuuming the house and having the groceries there, you know, not having to think about going to the shops and things like that on Sabbath, just having those small things that I could tick off before, going into the Sabbath. That really helped. Even just picking just one thing even that you delight in or enjoy, and making that special on a Saturday and just enjoying it with God and people makes it exciting.
Yeah, that's cool. I love that concept. Even growing up, my mum used to clean the house on Friday and light the candles, and you'd come home on a Friday afternoon and you could feel the Sabbath was coming. And even as a kid, when I didn't fully appreciate it, that feeling of coming home on a Friday and feeling that tomorrow was a day of rest where we didn't have to do chores, we didn't have to do homework. It was such a special thing, and I only really noticed it and really appreciate it when I moved out of home and started living with people who didn't clean the house for me on a Friday and didn't prepare a nice meal. And I really missed it. Like, I would often end up still going home to my parents' house for Sabbath because it just felt restful, and because, you know, living with other people who don't practice it, they're still running around and doing things. And yeah, it's just incredible how much of a difference that, I guess, preparing for the Sabbath makes. Buying those few things so that you don't have to think about it, and cleaning the kitchen so you don't have to think about it. Anyway, we have run out of time. Thank you so much, Georgia and Maryellen, for coming on the podcast today. It's been a delight to have you both here and just to hear more of your perspectives.
Thanks, ladies.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your choice of podcasting apps. If you want to read the article, you can go to sciencemag.com to read that or all the other articles we have written. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.